Haven't we been here before? Footsteps lead down to the note on the door that says, I can't wait 1 minute more. Oh, right. YouTube channel. Well, folks, I've been informed that it's, in fact, actually, July-ish? And that I've, missed some things along the way. So, what do you want to talk about?
For many Bluebird team members, Silent Hill is the title which made them fall in love in horror games.
Yes, the question on everyone's mind. What does my favorite M-list YouTuber think of Konami's latest attempt to trot out his favorite game and ride its corpse like the rootinest tootinest necromancer at the rodeo? Personally, I'm just tired. I don't necessarily care about any new entries to the series, especially soulless ones like remaking Silent Hill 2, and yet I'm completely unable to just kick back and throw peanuts at Bluebird Team's failures because Konami had to go and announce something actually interesting with Silent Hill F. Look, if you fuse Silent Hill and Umineko, I'm there faster than a cop in a white neighborhood. What I find interesting is how we're watching Silent Hill repeat a very important moment in its history. It was almost 20 years ago, when in the span of about 3 or so years, give or take, a remake to a beloved entry in the franchise and a bold new direction for the series were announced to some decent hype. One of these was Silent Hill Shattered Memories, a reimagining of the events of the original. The other was Origins, a brand new story headed up by Climax Studios and the next chapter in the world of Silent Hill. Now, the important difference between the two is a little thing called precedence. See, back in like 2006 to 2009, the Silent Hill fanbase was booming. When you got 4 of the greatest survival horror games of all time in the span of about 8 years, you have a pretty good reason to hold your head up high. Silent Hill wasn't a niche series either. This was mainstream survival horror and the people were rocking with it. So at E3 2006, when Origins was announced, you could forgive people for going into it with some modicum of excitement. If the last 4 were consistently fantastic, why would you assume a 5th would ever falter? Now we cut back to modern day, and Silent Hill is a series forever mourned and one that I have accepted being dead long ago. Much in the same way that we can understand a fan in 06's optimism for the franchise, it's very easy to sympathize with those who have no faith in Konami to do anything worthwhile with this IP. Case in point, compare the announcements of the 2 remakes and the responses that they generated. When you say a reimagining of Silent Hill 1 by the devs of Nicktoons Unite, people will respond with mostly a smattering of who? As opposed to when you say a remake of Silent Hill 2 by the Medium guys and it's met with a resounding why. Point being, Konami is not in a position where they can easily inspire confidence in this undead franchise. But back in the day, anything that came out of that cold Pennsylvania town would have been welcomed with open arms, so it makes sense why a lot of people would consider Origins to be the last good Silent Hill. See, when you're the first bad one, nobody knows it's a trend yet. If you want a more celibate example, look at the response to Phantom Menace on release compared to its legacy nowadays.
Are there any of you that think this is going to be a lousy movie? No!
When discussing Downpour, I talked about how people desperately wanted the game to be a thing that brought survival horror back, so the cope there was one of anguish. Origins is not the same. Origins was a game people wanted to like because from the outset, they had no reason not to. Even today, there are a good handful of people who do enjoy this game, and I understand it. Compared to later Western developed Silent Hills, it's the only one that actually felt like a Silent Hill game through and through. If it walks like a Mason, talks like a Sunderland, and bores like a Townsend, it must be Silent Hill. It is to these people that I apologize for what I have to say next, because Silent Hill Origins is not a good game. It is in fact a very bad game, but also I don't hate it. Much like Downpour, there are good intentions behind Origins. This was earnestly trying to be the next step for the series, a bold yet necessary move if we ever wanted to see Silent Hill continue. However, with a history of dev troubles and crunch, Origins was never going to be what the series needed to see its way through the latter half of the decade and beyond. So join me as we sift through the ashes and try to find anything worth salvaging. This is where it all began.
Oh, fuck. It's smoke. My God.
To get us started, let's talk about the biggest departure in Origins, its platform. Yes, unlike every game before it, except the Japanese exclusive visual novel for the Game Boy Advance, yes, you're very clever, Silent Hill Origins was primarily designed for the PlayStation Portable, and yeah, you can tell. Especially on the PlayStation 2 port, which came out about a year or so later, it has a lot of weird quirks both visually and mechanically that definitely feel like an attempt to translate things meant for a PSP to a real console. At least the game is affordable at $200. Are you fucking kidding me for this crap? Hey! The retro games market is diseased. Anyways, it's often been debated over which version of Origins is the superior one, and for the purposes of this video, I played the PS2 port on my totally legit $200 copy. Now, some of you out there may disagree on some opinions I may have about this game because I played the version that you don't like, and I just want to ease your mind by saying that I will refrain from critiquing any graphical issues I may or may not have had with the game, and also that I do not care. So with the technicals out of the way, I can get down to what really matters. The game itself. Silent Hill Origins tells the story of random trucking yahoo Travis Grady, who stupidly decides to take a shortcut through Silent Hill. On his way, he stumbles upon a house going up in flames on the outskirts of town and winds up saving a girl from the burning wreckage. After these events, he wakes up in Silent Hill and sets out to discover the truth behind the fire and the identity of the girl that he saved. Pretty standard stuff all in all. What makes Origins unique is that it's the first and only prequel in the series. Specifically, it tells the story of what happened leading up to the events of the first game, and that right there is a big issue. Silent Hill 1 is one of those games that the more and more I look back on it, the more excellent it becomes. Everything about it is so simple yet elegant in its design. There's not a wasted moment in its story. So why would we ever need more context on it? Silent Hill 1 is already this perfect little game headed up by an incredibly strong protagonist with a clear goal, while Origins is a limp story that is dragged down by its potato sack of a main character. To be wholly and truthfully honest, I don't hate Travis. I feel absolutely nothing for this man. When people talk about generic white guy McVideo game character, they're talking about Travis. The man has no sauce. He has nothing about him to either endear himself to the audience or even generate the smallest amount of interest in his plight. You'll hear me rag on Henry from 4 as the most boring protagonist in the series, but that's mostly a bit. Travis actually is the wettest of the wet cardboard. There simply is just nothing to his character, which sucks because as you'll see when we go deeper into the story, there could have been something there. But before getting to that, let's do some inventory and see what this brave next chapter has brought to the series. Oh, it's bad. Oh, it's all bad. Oh god. No, you shouldn't have done it like that.
Daddy.
Origins makes two major changes to the series, and both of them fall completely flat on their faces. These new arrivals are the change to how the Otherworld works and the combat. I'll start with the Otherworld because it's something that I often gloss over when talking about the franchise. So in previous titles, the way that the Otherworld functioned was you would go into a new area and explore around until you hit a predetermined point where the devs decided it would be appropriate to shift into a more hellish and nightmarish version of the area you've already been traversing. The result is every level more or less being split in half. One side a dilapidated and decrepit hovel, and the other a ghoulish landscape that oftentimes was able to convey a very particular emotion to the player. In the first game, the Otherworld was a very rusty and dark place. This is complemented in 3 where you can see some of the design carry over, but it also has this twinge of anger and resentment to it. While in the first title, the Otherworld felt more like a force of nature, in 3 it felt like a threat, like it wanted something from you. The most interesting example is in 2, where it often is debated if there even is an Otherworld. But, rest assured, there most definitely is. However, it's not a blood-soaked canvas, it's a very sad, very wet locale that more so invokes a hopeless nostalgia than does overt fear. Yet, these Otherworlds do share a very important aspect in common. They're completely out of your control. In my opinion, the whole point of the Otherworld is to rip the protagonist, and by extension the player, out of the familiar and into the truly alien. Time has somewhat cheapened the effect as it feels like everything nowadays does something similar to this, but you always gotta remember your roots. So what did Origins change exactly? If you're looking at your screen now, you can very clearly see that the Otherworld remains intact, same as it ever was. Well, let me show you how I got here. Yeah, this idea sucks. I get what they were going for on a gameplay perspective, because, like I said before, the other world just felt like the second half of the area. But now we are requiring the player to take things in and out of each world to solve puzzles in the other. That's something similar to how using the room in Silent Hill 4 worked, where you could use it to store items for later use. My issues come in when you consider that this is a Silent Hill game and the other world has always been more of a narrative device as opposed to a gameplay one. At its very core, Silent Hill is a scary game, and the other world is meant to be scary. And what makes it scary is both how aesthetically uncomfortable it is and how uncontrollable it is. To a new player, it feels like the other world can happen at any time. And whether you felt that or not, you can't deny that it's a significant form of tension for first-time players. The issue in Origins is that it just off-rip hands you the keys to the other world and just tells you not to leave the windows open. It completely hollows out the whole point of the series' gimmick in service to some of the most lackluster puzzles in the franchise. I'll be very honest here. Silent Hill never had the greatest puzzles. They were good, but for the most part, a Silent Hill puzzle is about finding X to unlock Y, where X can range from a key to a baby doll head. It's simple adventure game shit, but Origins reigns at the top when it comes to how forgettable some of its puzzles are. Most of them are just basic logic puzzles, and others are kind of asinine. I'm specifically thinking about the pillbox puzzle, which is reminiscent of the Innocent Men puzzle in Silent Hill 2, which, for the record, is my favorite puzzle in the series. This is because the puzzle is incredibly well thought out, and on each of its difficulties, it requires some genuine brain scratching to solve. In Origins, the puzzle is just read the note and guess based on the rooms that are all tangentially related to the dolls. Some of the correlations make sense, of course. The room that's burned probably belonged to the burned doll, but then you have the doll with the razor and the one with the knives. While I get that the barred door probably belongs to the one wielding a knife, how can I be sure he's not the one with the bloodied room? It's just something that's poorly thought out. In retrospect, yes, the answer is obvious, but when you're solving it, one could see how someone could get turned around like that. What I'm saying is, something like this is indicative of how good ideas tend to get turned around in Origins. Trust me, there is a possible reason for that, but I'll get to it in just a moment, so hold your horses. The other purpose for allowing the player to freely swap between the real and other world is to change how we interface with the levels. Again, I like the intent here, but let me ask an honest question. Why in the motherfuck are these levels so goddamn big? This shit is maddening, and let me explain why. So in literally every Silent Hill game, your protagonist will sometimes show signs of being tired after running for a while. Let me assure you that this is all for show. They're faking it, they're posers. If you want a boy who is truly tuckered out, look no further than our man Travis. Look at that strut. There's no way you do not get winded carrying all that ass. In all seriousness, I don't know why Origins has a soft stamina system. It's meant to build some sort of tension, but ultimately just comes off as a nuisance. This is further exacerbated by the aforementioned massive levels. I mean, Christ alive, look at this map, it's insane. What makes it even more baffling is, this is what the map looks like when you're done with it. It's so fucking red, all these doors are locked, there's no point in having all these rooms here. People often make the joke of, oh, yeah, ship's locked, you know, Silent Hill, what are you gonna do? Because in most Silent Hills, shit do be locked. But Origins is the most shit's locked the series has ever been, and as with most of this game's problems, it more than likely has to do with the fact that it's a PSP game. Realistically, you couldn't have a level on the scale of something like Brookhaven from 2 or The Forest from 4. But instead of making smaller, denser levels, they opted to spread everything out and make every other room filler. So I'm a slow fuck meandering around an arbitrarily gargantuan area, lacking any and all discernible purpose. They said video games aren't realistic. The other drawback from having a large area split in half being explored simultaneously is that it's easy to get wires crossed on what was where and when. Frequently I found myself wandering about with the inner monologue of an Alzheimer's patient in an escape room. The beauty of previous Otherworlds is that it often took an area you had become acquainted with and forced you to approach it from a new perspective. This could mean that the rooms you previously explored were now locked, while the ones that were locked are now open for business. It's frugal game design that tries to ensure that they used as much of the level as possible. In doing so, we can easily run a mental checklist of where we've been, what we've done, and what we hope to achieve. When you give me the power to swap back and forth as I please, I will inevitably get turned around. Part of this is due to the lack of any landmarks or iconography that Origins levels have, and the other part is that my head is soft and big ideas make my scalp itchy. If I had to boil Origins down to its core issues, it's tedium. While Downpour is obnoxiously bad, Origins is like an annoying little brother saying, "I'm not touching you, I don't care, Clyde, Mom said it's my turn, now fuck off." So what do I mean by this? Well, let's look at the weak point of all previous Silent Hills and work from there. Silent Hill is a series known for big ideas delivered in an honest and human way. It has a great narrative that reckons with some of the darkest and most heart-wrenching themes in gaming, yet doesn't revel in misery, but instead tries to give some form of hope no matter how dire its circumstances. What it fucking sucked at was the gameplay. Again, love Silent Hill, hand on heart favorite franchise ever, but I'd be lying if I told you the games were fun for a wide audience. They aren't. They're slow and methodical, relying heavily on atmosphere to keep players' attention in the moment. While this is fun to sponge-headed freak children like myself, to Connor Call of Duty and Hal Halo, this shit is boring. You could tell the devs of Origins caught some whiff of this criticism and did their damnedest to remedy the boring gameplay any way they could. But where exactly do you fix Silent Hill? Do you make things faster, more lively, or do you have more puzzles for the player to solve lying around? It seems the answer the Team Climax landed on was to improve the combat, which seems to be the answer every dev who takes the reins to the franchise gives. Here's where I gotta step up and be the parent in this situation and say, no, bad, you're grounded, stop doing that. While it is true that Silent Hill has pretty middling combat through almost its entire existence, that's less so a bug and more of a product of its overall design. Not to throw around pretentious words like ludonarrative to boost my ego, but in Silent Hill your protagonist often sucks at fighting. Across the board, all of them tend to be average people not built for these streets, except Alex, of course, hallowed be thy name. Combat is never meant to be the end point for these people. It's just something they're forced to interface with if they want to make it out of this situation alive. And the same goes for the player. You aren't supposed to revel in the combat of Silent Hill, which is why it's presented like yard work. It's not something you're excited to be doing, but once you get it done, it's over, and hey, maybe you found some parts of it mildly enjoyable or even rewarding. But nobody buys a house for the yard work, and likewise, nobody buys a Silent Hill to totally hyper combo manifestations of the fear of commitment. Unless you're like, into that. I know the question on your mind. How does Origins try to fix the combat? And you see, that's kind of the hard part, because while it definitely is trying, it's hard to say where exactly. For one, there's definitely more of it, which is obnoxious. But Travis is still a slow, lumbering mass like everyone else in this franchise, so how do we compensate? The answer? Variety. But not in the good way, like a bag of trail mix, in the bad way, like those joke jelly beans that taste like cat vomit. Yes, Mr. Grady is quite the thrifty combatant, as almost anything and everything can be snatched up and used as a weapon. But unlike Murphy, Travis is uninhibited by such notions as carrying limits and things feasibly possible according to modern laws regarding space and mass. Travis sees something he likes? Oh, that's going home with him. TVs? Mine. IV poles? Mine. Katanas? Oh, you know it. It hits a point of sheer absurdity where I'm armed to the teeth with pictures of small children and vases for seemingly no reason. Now I understand that there is some argument to be made along the lines of, well, no one made a stink about how James could fit 3 firearms, a chainsaw, zangetsu, and a plank down his pants, and to that I would agree. But also, consider this for a moment. There are certain things that we just accept in video games that aid in the convenience of play. It would be very obtrusive if we had to juggle our weapons wheel to make sure that everything fit under James's carrying capacity, because Silent Hill 2 is simply not that kind of game. This is a little thing known as the suspension of disbelief. I accept that James can carry all these items with him because he needs to for the sake of our story to move forward and to keep me, the player, engaged on a mechanical level. Origins shatters this suspension of disbelief because there's simply no end to how much of the shit you can carry on you. I'm not advocating that this game should have had a hard carrying limit. What I'm saying is, you can't let me pick up any random piece of garbage to use as a weapon and not have some sort of limit on it and not expect me to make epic gamer jokes at its expense. Compounding this is that the weapons don't feel any different from each other, or at least not different enough to warrant such variety. I could understand having all these together if you want to give the player multiple styles of play to approach the combat with, but at the end of the day, melee weapons can be categorized into 3 classes. Little guys, big boys, and bang bros. Little guys are short-ranged weapons like knives and the sort. Big boys are things like the katana and the IV pole, and bang bros are one-time use weapons that shatter on impact like the TV. Which leads me nicely into my next point, weapon degradation. Look, if even some of the best games of all time get shit for weapon degradation, you know for a fact that people are gonna doo-doo all over the 6th best Silent Hill for it. It's one of those design choices you understand within the wider context of the gameplay, but holy shit is it so annoying. To use the most famous example in recent years, in Breath of the Wild, people would get mad about degradation because it meant that if all of your weapons broke, you were shit out of luck unless you would have chucked bombs all day. However, in Origins, you can pick up maybe 60% of the weapons in the first level and be set for the rest of the game. So at that point, it just becomes tedious to break a weapon, open the menu, swap to another weapon, soon break it, open the menu, and repeat until the end of time. Honestly, the menu being as clunky as it is with no means to quick select in a game like this is a fucking travesty and... now don't I look foolish? Tee? In a rare case of this game doing something actually good with its combat, Origins does in fact have a failsafe in case you end up completely kaput on weapons. If Travis is unarmed, he can just start throwing haymakers, and honestly, this might be overpowered. If there's one thing that actually slaps in this game, it's fucking me, bitch! Fight back! Fight back! Come on, get some! Don't drop the rhythm. Genuinely, this is the funniest thing in the game. The fact that you can just raw-ass sucker punch a nasty critter in their jaw piece is endlessly entertaining, but ultimately silly. There's a reason why you couldn't do this in previous games, because it's a tone breaker. Silent Hill always was a fairly serious affair with some light smatterings of comedy. Something that the Western games seem to lack is an understanding of where that line should be drawn, which is upsetting because you would hope that a game so focused on recontextualizing the franchise's mythos would take a second to examine and appreciate the minutiae of what makes those games tick. Well, no matter what, I suppose there's more important things to focus on whether or not the game can nail a tone. I think now is a good time to talk about the biggest flaw Origins has, its story. I do apologize going forward because every time I talk about the bad Silent Hills, their biggest issue is and always will be the story. It's the same reason why people shit on the CDI Zelda games for their bad gameplay and dungeons, because at that point all Zelda was known for was its stellar design and fun mechanics. A point I will continually drive home is that Silent Hill is its story, and its story is always multifaceted. In the sense that there is a solid moment-to-moment narrative which tells a feature-complete story with an introduction, a rising action, a climax, a falling action, and a denouement, but there is also a symbolic narrative occurring simultaneously. For anyone familiar with good stories, this is a little thing we like to call standard. We can look at a work and explain what literally occurred in the story, and then we can take a step back and examine what this journey emotionally and symbolically means to our characters and to ourselves. Silent Hill 2 is a game about a man who searches a desolate town for his dead wife, but it also is a story about a man reckoning with his own grief, guilt, and uncertainties regarding a future he can't even begin to imagine. Throughout the story, we find both characters and manifestations of James's reaction to killing Mary. Every obstacle faced is both physically and emotionally taxing for James. This is a very simple concept to understand, and yet it's something that is completely lacking in every release after 4. The biggest failing of Origins' narrative is that it's incredibly thin. While the game is about the same length as every other title preceding it, like 6 to 8 hours, a lot of that time can be attributed to the artificially stretched levels, which leave very little room to get invested in the narrative. Which again is something that you can possibly chalk up to the game's home being on the PSP, but I want to step right in and say that's fucking bullshit. Some of my favorite stories in games live on handhelds. Mother 3 and Virtue's Last Reward both made their debuts on portable hardware, and even on the PSP you have titles like Crisis Core and Trails in the Sky carrying the banner of great narratives on the go. So I don't want to hear any excuses for Origins lacking in this department. Hell, this should have been where the game excelled. If we can't look, play, or be structured like the PS2 games, we can at least try to connect to our audience like them. But Origins doesn't, and this problem is made manifest right out the gate. Origins being the prequel to Silent Hill 1 is a mistake. Silent Hill sets itself up perfectly and needs no further context to understand and engage with its narrative. So automatically, Origins is made superfluous and unnecessary. This is further reinforced by the way that Origins tries to intersect Travis's story into the established themes and canon of the first game. There is a hearty disconnect between the things that matter to Travis and the things that matter to Silent Hill 1. Basically, take what I said about Silent Hill 2 having a literal and emotional narrative that play off of each other and make it so that they never had a chance of meeting unless it was us to exchange half-hearted niceties. To make this make sense, I'm going to recount both stories in a general sense, and then we'll get into the finer details once context has been established. So for the Alessa story, we open on Travis discovering the burning home and rescuing Alessa from it. He then encounters a woman who we soon learn is Dahlia from the first game, and is sent off to discover what happened to Alessa after the fire. Over the course of his journey, we discover that almost all of the town is in on the conspiracy to sacrifice Alessa to bring about the birth of God and usher in a new era of paradise. This ends with Travis intervening, killing the final boss, escaping the town as Alessa splits off into Cheryl, soon to be discovered by a passing Harry Mason, which sets up the events for Silent Hill 1. Travis' story is that his mother at one point suffered a psychotic breakdown and tried to kill him. This led to his mother being sectioned and his father being left to care for Travis on his own. After a while, the despair and stress of this responsibility overtook Travis's father, and he takes his own life in Silent Hill and is left for the young Travis to discover. These events traumatize Travis to the point that he has repressed most of the details and spends the back half of the game coming to terms with the facts and accepting them. So where's the problem? Well, first and foremost, Travis has nothing to do with Alessa's story. He's there but for the grace of God and simply follows her narrative because the game needs him to. Now, to say they're completely separate would be dishonest of me, but they definitely don't work for each other, that's for sure. If we used my reading of Silent Hill 1 as a basis, we can assume that Origins is supposed to be an inverse of that. I posited that Silent Hill 1 is a game about accepting responsibility with the fears and anxieties that accompany living for someone else. This is often found in a new parent, so logically Origins would focus on the perspective of a child. Alessa is clearly a victim of abuse and therefore carries a lot of emotional baggage as a result. Travis is shown to be repressing trauma and having no healthy way to cope with what has happened to him. Both stories have an overarching theme of what happens to children when the ones who are meant to be responsible for them either aren't or are actively hurting them. I also feel like this isn't just some ass pull on my end to make my argument seem stronger, as we have in-game evidence that this is more or less what they were going for. In the theater, Travis finds passages about psychological responses to trauma, and one of them mentions the formation of a split personality, one who harbors a resentment towards the abuser and one that wholeheartedly loves them and seeks their approval. It could be assumed that the game is trying to insinuate that Alessa splitting off into Cheryl, while she remains a vengeful spirit, is supposed to be a trauma response. The problem with this is, while these are great ideas, it requires a character to latch onto for them to work. See, I can sit here and opine on all the thematic intricacies of this story, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because Travis Grady isn't a character. He's an avatar that happens to have trauma. The game just saddled this model with parental issues and expects us to feel bad for him. To compare, Harry was equal parts funny, likable, kind, and earnest. We understood his goals and wanted to see him achieve them. So when something tragic happens to him, we can relate and feel bad for him, but also still root for his success. There's none of that going on with Travis. Despite the writer clearly having an idea for Travis's arc, they only wrote the ending without setting any of it up in the beginning. It's the inverse of a common problem new writers have, where they have a great idea for a story and spend all the time on the details of how it starts, but when they get to writing an ending, they just fumble it. To an extent, I'm impressed, but I'm also equal parts annoyed because it's clear they had a good idea here. The issue of Travis lacking any characterization can go double for Alessa, who is reduced to being a spooky ghost who makes siren noises at Travis all day. Unlike Travis, who has a weak character, Alessa has no character. Continuing the trend of common writing errors, something that frequently happens when someone does a prequel involving a mysterious yet influential character is that they try to go deeper and explain who they are and why they are the way that they are. The problem is, in most cases, the character they want to explore isn't interesting on a personal level. Their actions, more often than not, are what defines them, not any singular emotional note. To use an example, Oz in Oz the Great and Powerful does not matter as a character. Nobody watched The Wizard of Oz and said, well, I just gotta know this guy's deal, because it doesn't matter. The wizard isn't the point of that story, and we don't need to know his backstory, but you can contrast that with Wicked. Wicked tells the story of the Wicked Witch of the West and actually does explain a good amount of her character, which doesn't necessarily enhance the original material, but it's still a good product on its own because they chose a character you can actually expand on. The problem with prequels are they're equally contingent on what you're exploring and how well you explore it. To circle back to Alessa, as a character, she does not matter. We as an audience understand that she is a victim of the cult and soon became Cheryl. We all got that in the first game. We also understood that Dahlia is a bad person because she did all of those awful things to her daughter. There really isn't much else worth explaining, if there was anything to explain in the first place. It feels almost insulting how they use Alessa as a source for cheap scares in some places. Like, her struggle doesn't matter so long as we can use her to get a free jump out of the audience, so why bother making us sympathize with her? If I were being less charitable, I'd say it feels kind of heartless in a way. It's clear that they had an idea of what they wanted these characters to be used for, but they had no clue how to make them work together, so instead they just opted to have both Travis and Alessa work in parallel to each other. This game should have either been a prequel to Silent Hill 1 following a local as everything goes to hell, or a story about Travis Grady, a man who cannot reckon with his past and happens upon the place where it all started for him. Perhaps you could meet the ghost of Alessa long after the events of the first title and share a poignant moment between the two of them. Just anything that isn't this, please, I beg you. I already briefly touched on it, but I do want to discuss the emotional climax of this interlocking tale of tragedy and woe. So after being taken by the cult, Travis ends up passing out and he fights a Doom enemy and just kind of walks away. No, I mean, seriously, look at this thing. I know Silent Hill has always been a little over the top with its final bosses. I mean, hell, the ending of 3 had you literally fighting God, but this is just too much. It's one of those things where you can just immediately point at it and go, right there is why they don't get it. To draw a direct comparison, in 1, you fight the Incubus, who is on a similar wavelength of being a Judeo-Christian representation of some sort of demonic entity. However, where the difference comes is in its presentation. The Incubus doesn't come out snarling and gnashing his maw at you. He's an ominous figure that just floats there and invites the audience to project any and all interpretations they may have on his purpose or design. Meanwhile, this fucking goober is just a circumcised Hell Knight and goes down like a pussy. So, after conquering what may be the easiest final boss in a Silent Hill game, Travis just gets up and leaves. He was in the middle of the cult's headquarters and just pieces out of there no problem, which again affords the audience another chance to scream, what was the friggin' point? Well, the actual point is this little shot at the end where you can see Harry picking up Cheryl at the beginning of 1, something that we already knew about and have seen before. Unless this is your first Silent Hill game, that is, which is something that Pat brought up to me that I never really considered. Post Silent Hill 4, the series stopped using numbers to designate their games, so any release made after that point could potentially be someone's first Silent Hill game. And to those people, I'm so sorry. Because if Silent Hill Origins is your first Silent Hill, I have no clue how you would decipher this game. Because if you lack the context of the first title, then you'll be so lost since the game takes no opportunities to build its world or breathe life into its cast. Which again, to give a direct comparison to a good prequel, if you played Metal Gear Solid 3 as your first Metal Gear game, like I did, the game still stands on its own and is still a great time, and playing the rest of the franchise can only enhance what you found in that title. Origins is just a series of soy jack points to references from 1 and 3, and that right there is the eternal curse of Silent Hill made manifest. Silent Hill will always be a victim of its own success. Every new release is met with a smattering of critiques saying this was done better in X Silent Hill, so the devs try to meet those expectations and instead become mere copies to masterpieces. No Western Silent Hill game has the chance to be seen as an equal to the classics, but also none of them try to be anything more than just an equal. Even when they have good ideas, they are trounced by this invisible hand holding them to the continuity of the originals. And to what end? Why? The best game in the franchise has nothing to do with any sense of established canon, so why not just try something different? Why keep evoking the same themes and iconographies of the original 4? Well, I know why. It's because it has a better chance of making money. Even after 16 years since Origins' release, the series still desperately is trying to recapture what magic they had in those first 4 titles. Has anything truly changed? No, Silent Hill is still a dead franchise that is only being trotted out to capitalize on the success of the Resident Evil remakes to make Konami another quick buck. No longer is this the series that had the balls to confront its audience with uncomfortable themes and ideas. No longer is this the franchise that asked the big questions about who we are and why we hide what we feel. No, this is just Silent Hill, a Konami product. While that is depressing, we can also look back through all these years and remember the time where a game like Origins represented infinite possibility. Despite everything it ended up being, there was a time where Origins was the future, a time where it represented hope and new horizons. We are at an impasse. While I fully expect 2 Remake to rip out my heart and dance on it for the promise of $70 in Bloober Team's wallet, F could be a turning point. It represents the same thing Origins did all those years ago, a second chance. I'm still cautiously optimistic regarding F, but it's the best shot the series has for being good, and quite possibly, it could be the last. So here I am, a lowly fanboy, holding out hope that Ryu Kishi can pull it off somehow, in spite of everything Konami has done and continues to do to tell me that this series is long dead and I should just stop caring about it. I still remain hopeful. We have a chance at something great here. Origins was a faulty attempt at something profound, one that was hamstrung by this obligation to what came before it. We need something bold, something new, something that is, in its own unique way, Silent Hill. I don't want Silent Hill 2 version 7.89. I want Ryu Kishi's Silent Hill. For good and for bad, if it's something different, that's all I want. Now the question remains, will they rise to the occasion and validate our love for these games, or will they simply repeat history and let the series go up in smoke? My name is Michael, and this episode made me realize how much I fucking hate sticks.
Open our heart. We find keys to unlock every door.